bit chilly. And hello from North Carolina. Wonderful to have you tonight. All right, everyone, we're just going to jump right in. And as you know, some people, latecomers join, we'll have some, I'll be adding them in. Thank you again, and welcome everyone to the Herringut Learning, our Herringut Coastal Science Center's March Learn, Discover, Grow event. My name is Patrick Burnham. I am the Educational Programs Coordinator, and we're so excited to have you join us tonight for this wonderful presentation. I'm very much looking forward to learning about stuff alongside you tonight. For those of you who don't know of us, the Herringut Coastal Science Center's mission is to educate students and communities about the connections between the ocean, inland waters, and the economy of Maine. Our work spans a history of 21 years engaging with students, educators, and community members in organizations to spark a sense of wonder and place for the natural world and those that gain a livelihood from it. Because our time this evening is spent talking about the amazing natural resources that Maine has to offer us, I want to begin our time with an acknowledgement honoring all the Indigenous people. We wish to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples have maintained to the Aki, which is land, and Nebi, which is water. Herringut Coastal Science Center and our work exists within this Aki land and Ebi water of this unceded territory of the Wabanaki homeland. It is our responsibility to foster relationships and opportunities that strengthen the well-being of the Indigenous peoples who carry forward their traditions of their ancestors. I also wish to note that Herringut Coastal Science Center and the Seabird Institute are nonprofit organizations that are supported by donations and gifts from our participants. Through your generosity, we are able to provide programs that engage students and communities to think about our connections to the natural world. Our hope for this Learn, Discover, Grow virtual event is that you learn something new and share that with the people in your life. So if you find tonight's event informative, we would greatly appreciate your donation. We will include a donation link to our website as well as in the chat at the end of the presentation. Again, we love to offer these virtual events in a collaborative way. Because of this, we ask that everyone make sure that their microphones are on mute to reduce any competing voices and noises. And at the end of the presentation, we'll make sure that we have time for everyone to ask questions. You can also type questions into the chat box, and I'll be compiling them over the night so we can ask at the end. With all of that said, now, I am so happy to introduce our guest speaker tonight. Eva Lark is the Senior Manager of Public Programs at Hog Island Audubon Camp. She's over there somewhere. Hello. Eva Lark has a master's degree in recreation and parks management from Frostburg State University and a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the Lander University. She works year-round for the Hog Island and manages the various social media channels, marketing, camp registration, scholarships, rentals, and hiring of seasonal staff. She wears many hats, everyone. She's a hard worker. She is currently the director of both the Costa Rica Teen Camp and the Mountains to Sea Birding for Teens session. During the winter months, she runs virtual programming, including the popular Turn the Page Book Club and Making Bird Connections lecture series. She has been a birder for over a decade and credits the winter warblers of Florida as being her spark birds. So if everyone can please give Eva a virtual welcome, and we're so excited. I'm going to turn everything over to you.
Thanks so much, Patrick, for the warm welcome. I'm going to share my screen and jump right into the presentation. But afterwards, I hope you have some questions. I'll do my best to answer those. I'm here on behalf of the Seabird Institute, which is a part of National Audubon Society. And under the Seabird Institute, we have our researchers, and I'm more on the education side of the house, which is Hog Island Audubon Camp. So certainly we'll be diving into how the seabird research here in Maine is actually causing a ripple effect across the globe in seabird conservation. And for many people who are local, a lot of you probably don't even realize that right here in our backyards in Maine is really the founding of so many scientific methods that are used worldwide on a variety of species. So we'll kind of go a little bit into the history and then bring it back up to modern day. So to start our history of seabird research in Maine, we actually will start with this guy, Steve Kress. He is the founder of Project Puffin. And almost 50 years ago, he founded this seabird project and had some great ambitions on restoring a puffin colony. But before the creation of this seabird research, it actually starts right here at Hog Island on the education side. So Hog Island Audubon Camp is located in Midcoast, Maine, and we have been running adult summer camp for over 80 years, starting for teachers, but now mostly we have adult bird watching camp. So if you didn't get to go to summer camp as a kid, you can come as an adult now, and we'll definitely take you to see puffins. But Steve was a bird life instructor in the late 60s. And while he was at Hog Island teaching folks who were coming to Midcoast, Maine to learn about the natural world, he happened to go into our library and pick up a book by Ralph Palmer. And in that book, there was a spark of an idea, because he read that there was once a puffin colony on Western and Eastern Egg Rock. And the reason that that held such weight with him is because every week of the summer, he had been taking bird watchers and teachers and other folks out on boats to the Egg Rock, Eastern Egg Rock and Western Egg Rock, but there were no puffins out there in the late 60s. They were long gone. And so this idea of what if we could restore that puffin colony, that is really where the plan was formed, right there at Hog Island as Steve was an instructor. Now you may wonder why we don't have puffins, why were they gone? And largely this would be true of many bird species throughout the world, but the feather trade in the late 19th century was so demanding for beautiful plumage for hats that bird populations were decimated, including many types of seabirds. Like in this photo, you'll see the woman has a lace tern literally on her hat. So in order to produce this fine fashion, many birds by the millions were killed. They were hunted for their plumes. And because of that, the Audubon societies started here in the United States as a reaction to stop the feather plume trade. So certainly by the time Steve arrived in Maine, the puffins were long gone, just like many of the tern species as well. But as I said, this idea that if there once was a puffin colony, what if we could bring it back? And a seabird colony had never been restored before, so there was no manual or methodology to follow. I think what's really remarkable is that this became a laboratory for seabird research, and it continues today. So from 1973, at the very beginning of Project Puffin, until 1986, Steve brought translocated puffin chicks from Newfoundland to Eastern Egg Rock. And you can see here, he actually was transporting them in this kind of makeshift carrier, which was like tin cans. And he would pull the puffins out, put them in the burrow. And then of course, the researchers had to feed them every day with the hope that the puffins would fledge and return back to that same island. Many seabirds have site fidelity, so they want to come back to the place where they think they have been fledged. In this case, often it's their birthplace, but we were trying to do a little trick here where we were taking Newfoundland puffins, bringing them to Maine, and then hoping that they would come back to the place that they last left land. So you can see here on the right, this is what a puffin looks like right before it fledges. Not that beautiful, stunning orange beak that maybe you're used to. These are the more awkward teenage years of a puffin here. But that was the hope. So for many, many years, there's all these puffins coming in, being reared, and hopefully fledging. And you got to remember, seabirds are a long-lived species. A puffin can live 30 years. So, and they don't start actually breeding. Average is usually like around 5 years. So a lot of people ask, why did Steve wait so many years for a puffin to come back? Well, actually, it does take a few years for them to reach sexual maturity. Now, the one thing that this puffin colony didn't have, it had plenty of little fledglings leaving every year, but it didn't actually have adult puffins. And so after the first few years, when the puffins were not returning, Steve realized that his colony was missing the most important thing, which were other adult puffins. And so another idea was formed, and it was actually taking a little bit of a cue from hunters, which is kind of full circle if you think about it. Puffins are decimated because of hunters, but they're also restored because of decoys. And so Steve decided that if we put out these decoys, that then the rock, Eastern Egg Rock, would at least appear to be a puffin colony. It would have at least the appearance of a full attractive space. So this is actually called social attraction. Many seabirds live in colonies, so they don't want to live in a private spot. They want to live with lots of other seabirds. And so by putting the decoys out, it would at least attract them in, and maybe if enough were attracted, then they would stay and they would breed. So in 1977, we found the first translocated puffin to return. And the reason we were able to decipher that is because of a band on the leg of the puffin. It had a white band. Bird banding is used to track individuals' birds. And in this case, it was a great indicator that the project at least attracted the bird back to the island. It didn't mean that it was breeding or mating, but at least it came back to where it was supposed to be. And that in itself probably fueled Steve's desire to keep going, keep translocating more chicks, even though it was a slow process and one that took a lot of work. But then finally, on July 4th, 1981, there was a puffinwood fish. And for those out there who know a thing or two about seabirds, a puffinwood fish means they're feeding their young. They're not going to be flying off of the ocean with a mouthful of fish for themselves. They're coming in with a mouthful of fish because they have a chick in the burrow. And so this was the sign that they had all been waiting for, because it meant that they were finally breeding. So there were 4 pairs that bred in 1981, but that was just the beginning of what now is almost a 50-year program of bringing seabirds back to these restored colonies. So if it could work on Eastern Egg Rock, why not let it work on other islands? So we expanded the program, expanded the number of research islands. Every little red dot you see on this map indicates a seabird island currently with the Seabird Institute. So we have Seal, Matinicus, and Eastern Egg Rock, the 3 that are to the farthest east. Those are all puffin colonies. And then our 4, Stratton all the way down south of Portland, Outer Green, Jenny, and Pond. Those do not have puffins, but they have another seabird species that we were actually able to restore, not just one seabird species, but many. And those are our tern species that nest in Maine. So we have common terns, Arctic terns, roseate terns, and in our southern most research islands, we have least terns. So we use the same applications that we did with puffins, decoys. This time we didn't use the translocation of chicks. So just the decoys alone were bringing in the terns, because the terns were in those areas. They weren't completely wiped out like the puffins were. So at least though what it showed is that we could attract them to a habitat that would be suitable we could attract them to an island where our researchers could study them and also maybe help with some management. And the decoys, we definitely experimented with different types of materials, different types of shapes. As you can see, the decoy on the right is a very crude, kind of rudimentary shape, but it worked. By really honing in on field marks, we learned that size is not necessarily important of the decoy, but those more distinguishing parts are often more important. And then, of course, we realized that if we manage the actual islands themselves, not just attracting them in, but creating better habitat for them, we could even get them to nest more. So this was really where I was talking about earlier, where it's a laboratory, a living laboratory, where we can experiment and try different methods on how to restore bird populations. In this case, the photo shows you these little kind of covered areas. Instead of having a burrow, having these little nest boxes, and the carpet is a vegetation control, but it creates the illusion of there being rocks and boulders. And certainly it worked with the help of some other research methods that we came up with, such as using sound boxes. Another thing, if you can envision a seabird colony thriving with hundreds, maybe thousands of birds, you could probably imagine it's going to be loud. And so if you're attracting birds to let's say Eastern Egg Rock, where there were no terns or puffins nesting, you put in your decoys, but then the island is silent. That's not necessarily a seabird colony. So we realized by attracting them with actual acoustic sounds would also help. They can hear that from a large distance. And then using these mirror boxes, think about the bird sees its reflection, it sees the other bird moving, which is just itself. It gives that illusion that there's another bird there, and just becomes something that is even more attractive than a decoy that doesn't move. So again, these experiments are something that we've been able over these last 50 years to keep trying, to keep pushing science and technology. But honestly, some of these very simple things like a decoy or a sound box has proven to be successful with not just species here in Maine, but all over the place. We'll go into some more worldwide implications. But here, this is kind of a nice graph to show you, not only have we restored the colonies, but the colonies are indeed thriving. So the orange line on the graph is our puffin burrows, active burrows on Eastern Egg Rock. And you can see there's some dips and ups and downs. Some of that has to do with weather, food sources, surface temperature, and climate change. But you'll notice the trend for both terns and puffins is that it's increasing. And in the case of the terns, that's the blue line on the graph. And those are the common terns across all of our seabird islands. Again, the same thing. You see these kind of ups and downs. And often, by plotting this data over a large data set of many, many years, we can really start to untangle all the things that are impacting bird populations. So why stop here in Maine? When we have these techniques, we can expand our work across our Audubon network. National Audubon is all across the country and through the Americas. So we're able to provide technical assistance on research projects and provide the skills and know-how, the methods to restore colonies. And so we've been able to replicate these programs with different tern species, Albatross in Hawaii, and really harness the knowledge that started right here in Maine and take it throughout the US. But of course, why stop in the US? We have seabirds declining all around the world. And so a wonderful program called the Hertz Fellowship actually brings in researchers from international locations to come to Maine, spend a whole season on our seabird islands, and truly immerse themselves in the work of social attraction the research methods, the different types of things that they can then take back to their home countries and replicate and expand and bring back all these other species, many of them really endangered, critically endangered, or facing different types of climate change like sea level rise. And by our one little location here at the Seabird Institute in Maine, you can see that global perspective of how things are shaping up around the world. So I'm going to give you a couple little case studies that have been successful that we've worked with. This is a really beautiful, stunning bird called the short-tailed albatross. It was once thought extinct in the 1940s. They thought it was completely gone, but a population was refound. And this is an interesting story because it's very similar to the story of puffins. The short-tailed albatross was also hunted for feathers in the 1900s. 6 million albatross died by 1900 from hunting. And this is not just true of albatross. This is true of so many herons and seabirds across the world. But this is a direct correlation of where our puffins were hunted here in Maine. They were also hunted in Japan. Now, when they rediscovered their breeding grounds, it was a nice, thriving little colony, but unfortunately, it was on this island that you see here, Torishima, which is also called Bird Island. And you may notice a very distinguishing mark about the island. It's an active volcano. So if you have the last large population of short-tailed albatrosses nesting on a volcanic island, you have a problem, right? Because one big eruption event could decimate a population. So here is a perfect example of translocation in another country, translocating chicks from Torishima to another nearby suitable habitat island in Japan. In this case, it was Mukajima. And we were able to translocate them just like the puffins. It had to happen over a course of many years. So from 2008 to 2012, they were, Japanese researchers were translocating their rather large chicks here, not quite as easy to translocate as a little puffin chick. And then of course they had to feed them, and with the same hope that they would fledge and hopefully come back, not to the home, the island that they were born on with the big volcano, but with this new island that was farther away, safer, and had suitable habitat and food sources. And luckily, it was successful. The same methods were used, create decoys, so that when they do come back, they feel like it is their home. It has a thriving population of other short-tailed albatrosses. So this was a great example of that kind of same applications, the same principles being used that you took directly from puffins, and then you were able to do the same thing with a much larger species like an albatross. This map shows you locations of seabird restoration across the world. You'll notice that it really spans across all the oceans. The next one we're going to talk about is China. The Chinese crested tern is a critically endangered seabird. So critical, in fact, that they were also thought extinct all the way up to the year 2000. So in the year 2000, they were rediscovered, and population estimates were around 50 individual birds. When you have a population that small, it really needs something done very quickly, because it doesn't take, one bad season where there aren't chicks, and it can really affect their population long term. And of course, their population was affected because of egg collecting, snakes and rats. Actually, mammals are a big problem with a lot of seabird species. These islands who normally don't have predators like snakes or rats, then they're introduced, usually by us in some way, can then go through and decimate an island that once had no predators. And then of course, cyclone events. We do see that cyclones and hurricanes and larger weather events can impact populations, especially once they start to get small in size. So just like we did with our other tern populations, the thought was, what if we just try to do the same thing, put out some terns, put out some decoys, and try to attract them. So first we had our Chinese researchers come and spend the summer in Maine, really learn about all the types of research methods that we use. And you can see them here in this photo. This is in 2013. Immediately upon returning to China, they installed all of these Chinese crested tern decoys. And you can tell they're decoys because they only have one leg, right, instead of two. And so they just have the base. And, you know, once they're there, you're just hoping that it's going to work. In this case, in 2014, the very next year, 3 Chinese crested terns. Now this photo, if you look at it, they're nesting with the more common great crested terns, all those yellow beaks that you see there. You'll see the 3 that have more orange colored beaks. Those are the Chinese crested terns. You also see that there's a decoy there. And success, chicks were reared. And again, you know, this is a population that is increasing every year. When there are more chicks born, you know, you're directly impacting, when it's a population of 50, you're directly impacting that number substantially with every single chick that is born. So when you think about all these research projects going around the world, there were no seabird restoration projects before Project Puffin, before that beginning one. And 50 years of experiments, 50 years of data and research methods being tried and true. Everything starting right here on this little rock in the middle of Muscongas Bay in Midcoast, Maine. This is what our field research looks like today. You'll notice that it's a smattering of tents, the little blue tarps that you see. Our researchers live out there. And then literally it's just a rock and thousands of birds. But the amazing things that are happening on these research islands are not just impacting kind of the techniques that we, you know, really honed in the last 50 years. I'm really excited about where we're going to take it in the next 50 years because technology is really getting to be more advanced than ever in ways that are really impacting conservation. A perfect example would be these small GPS tags that you can mount on the back of a seabird. Now, before, the technology would not allow you to mount a big backpack on the back of a seabird, a small one such as a puffin. But now you can see in this little inset photo, this GPS tag is literally the size of a dime and it weighs hardly anything. So by strapping it on the back of a seabird, the data that we're able to glean from one individual is so much more than what we could understand by sitting on a seabird breeding colony and watching them, because we know the birds fly away and then we have no idea what they're doing until they fly back. In this case, it gives us a little snapshot of what is happening. So by that little GPS tracker, we can see where they're feeding, how long they're spending in certain areas, how far they're going out to sea. And this can really focus our areas of what we need to protect. What areas are they visiting? Why is this important? And the big thing here is with forage fish. These seabirds are eating fish and they go where the fish are. By being able to know where those fish are, we can think about those areas being more protected. We can think about fisheries management. And by helping those, we can help the seabirds. And honestly, by helping with fisheries management, we can help even our own fisheries production for humans, because we're going to make it a more stable population. If you look at the example of this big juicy fish here, it's called a butterfish. It's a tropical species. A lot of people, you may look at that and be like, wow, we got some really nice tropical species coming to Maine. That will be great for puffins. The adult puffins can eat it, but the young little pufflings literally cannot swallow it. And so there have been cases where a puffin is in the burrow of the little chick and butterfish are all around it and it's starving to death. So when our sea temperatures rise and the fish populations change, it can really impact the bird species. luckily we have a 50-year data set to show how the temperatures are rising, how the sea surface temperature right here in Maine is increasing. We can show that the populations of our fish are changing. We see how some of our more northern species are going farther north because the Gulf of Maine is too warm. We're seeing species like butterfish come in who were not here in such number before. But we've also seen some success stories. Haddock is a new addition to the puffin diet because of fisheries management, because there have been some limits set. That's a lot of these fisheries that are rebounding are actually now becoming part of the diet of puffins where they weren't, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So another really important thing to think about when you visualize bird conservation is to think about it not as one place. We can do all this work here in Maine on our 7 seabird islands, but unless we're looking at the full migration pattern, if we're looking at the full hemispheric way that birds are migrating and moving, that's really what we have to think about when we're tasked with really preserving species and thinking about their long-term survival. A puffin will spend 8 months of its life of the year out in the ocean. It's just spending a short amount of time on its breeding colony. And more so, a young puffin is going to spend the first 2 years of its life never touching land. So in order to really impact their population, we can't just focus on what's happening on the breeding side. We have to think about what's happening on its whole life cycle. And so again, harnessing the use of technology, these little devices that you see on the bottom right are called Geo Locators. You can attach them right there to the leg of the puffin. You'll notice that it's not much larger than a bird band. And this little geotag can be on the puffin for a long time. So we can see the full migration. We can see where puffins go when they leave the breeding colony, because often we don't know where they are at many points of their migration. But because of these geotags, now for the first time, we're able to solve some of these mysteries of seabirds. And in the case of the puffins, we realized that they go to a place called the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts. This is such a rich area of biodiversity of bird species, marine mammals, fish of all kinds. And because of research, we can say this little triangle, this little area that you see, the triangle and the square, that's the mounts and the canyons. This is what we need to protect. We don't need to protect the whole huge ocean. It's not realistic. It's not going to probably be something that people are interested in, even though that would be nice. But by focusing in on these really rich biodiverse areas, if we can protect them and slow down the fishery industry in that area, we can maybe give these birds a chance. And so this is a perfect example. Audubon was able to help lobby to make this into a marine national monument. And it did. It happened at the end of Obama's term in presidency. It was able to be passed and protected. And now all the seabirds, not just puffins, there's so many more, are able to go to this area and have a place that is protected, a place that they can complete their migration cycle without having that other pressure on them, because it's the full picture, not just the breeding season that's important. And if you take another species like this Arctic tern, I mean, this is one where it's even more global because their migration is literally from Maine out to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, all the way down south. They're called Arctic tern for a reason. They're going all the way down from back and forth, Arctic to Antarctica. And you'll notice that there are areas, though, that more of them congregate. So again, let's focus on these areas where they're congregating. Most likely those areas are important for other bird species, important for other fish, marine mammals, everything that's kind of, really biodiverse. They're going to be in these like hotspot areas that you notice a congregation. And if we focus our areas there, we can make a big difference probably in the population of this species, but also many other seabird species and other organisms like marine mammals and other fish. So drones are an interesting topic because a lot of environmentalists are kind of anti-drone, or they don't like them on trails, but I want to flip the script here and kind of get you to think outside the box, because that's really what our seabird research has been about for the past 50 years, is pushing not only technology, but pushing like ideas and trying to really be creative. So I thought this was an interesting example. It's one that we're not, you know, using widespread, but it's certainly something to ponder, especially as the technology advances. What if we took a drone and were able to take photos of seabirds on their nesting grounds and really get a sense of their population? Currently, it takes a team of researchers spending a whole summer on an island to really get a sense of how many birds are breeding, how many birds are there. And there's only so many islands you can actually go and do a census of. But if you're able to take something like a drone, you can fly miles and miles out and really snapshot the whole island, do it in grids, and then analyze those for nesting success. This is just one example of how, you know, we're trying to be creative about using the technology that we have, but harnessing it for conservation. And then I want to bring it back to our decoys. We talked about decoys at the very beginning, back in the 1970s, starting with those puffin decoys. And now we're proud to say that the Mad River decoys, which we used for many, many years, is now part of Audubon. Our workshop is right there in Bremen, Maine, where our researchers work. And the decoys that we're creating right here in Maine are anything from huge albatross decoys to little tiny least tern decoys. And we are able to have our research team make them, paint them, ship them worldwide in the winter. And then in the summer, our researchers are working on our seabird islands. So here's our 2019 stats. You can see that we had species going anywhere from Australia to Bermuda to Puerto Rico, which had been impacted by hurricanes, all throughout the United States. And every winter, there's a whole new list of research projects that we're working on and creating decoys and creating these sound boxes and the mirror boxes and all the different kind of ways that we can push and help seabirds worldwide. Sometimes we're brought in as consultants, but this is another a great way for us to aid and help other projects by just giving them the actual materials they need to get a project up off the ground. And then for you guys tuning in, I want to invite you to tune in to our seabirds. You can actually watch them from the comfort of your home this summer, because we have over 9 different cameras installed throughout our research stations and on Hog Island. And these cameras are through the explore.org foundation. You can go to explore.org, you can click on Audubon, you can see all of our cameras. They'll be going live really soon because the puffins are returning. And the really great thing about these is they let us see down inside the burrow. So in this picture, you're looking at a puffin burrow. And if you're a scientist studying this bird, you have to imagine how frustrating it is to watch the bird, and then it just disappears. It is down in the burrow and you have no idea what's going on down there. You can grub a puffin and reach down and pull it out, but it's not going to show you the behavior. You're not going to understand the dynamics. And this is where our puffin burrow camera actually takes you right inside. You know, the amount of things that we've learned from these cameras is mind-blowing. We get to see the interactions between the parents, the interactions between other puffins, between the breeding pair, who shares responsibilities when, who's feeding, because they have leg bands. We can even tell them apart. We can identify the fish. You folks at home can even help us by identifying fish and submitting your results to us. And what we're able to do is we're able to get that full, complete picture. So this is a graph showing you food deliveries, meaning the puffin adult brought in some food, fish of some type, to one of our pufflings. And this is actually compiled throughout the breeding season. So we can see exactly how many fish were delivered, how often they were delivered, and then we can superimpose sea surface temperatures across that. And what we saw is that when we look at the surface temperature, you see these big peaks in the middle here. You'll notice these two big orange peaks is when the temperature of the sea surface was very high. The food deliveries were very low. So it's a direct correlation that we can make between the warming sea and how that affects the bird population. Because if they're getting less food, it means they're also not doing well as a thriving little chick, right? The less food they're getting, the less nutrients they're getting, the less likely they're going to survive. And so this is a wonderful way where we can harness the technology of those cameras, and also people like you, community science, where we can get people to tune in and tell us what's happening. And then we can use the other data that we're collecting about weather and sea temperatures and really get this full picture of what's going on with the little burrow down below where we can't normally see. We can see that during a heat wave that the chicks are lightweight, they're weak. We can see that after the heat wave and the food deliveries increase, that the chicks became more robust, they started thriving again. Is this direct correlation that we're able to make? Because at the end of the day, seabirds they're like the canaries in the mine, right? The seabirds are telling us that there are some major issues going on. They're showing us directly by their population declines and ups and downs, how the temperature is changing, how the weather patterns are changing, and how the fish populations are changing. Globally, you'll see seabird abundance has dropped 70% in the past 60 years. Despite our best efforts to be restoring colonies and help protect species, there's so many threats going on right now. And we're noticing that we can, heed their advice and hopefully make some actionable items that we can do, even you guys at home can do. Some of that is advocacy, calling your legislators, making their, the voices of our birds heard. And because it's not just the birds, it's impacting all of us. Really advocating for different types of conservation and inviting even lawmakers to come out and see the birds in person. Nothing more impactful than sitting at a seabird colony and hearing and feeling the sense of what's happening in that area. And then for those who don't want to just be at home, if you're interested in coming to see puffins in Maine, we do have our Audubon staff on boat trips that go out to Eastern Egg Rock. So you can come and see this fabled, mecca of seabird conservation in the world. There's a few boats that take trips out there. Our Audubon staff are on the Hardy boat out of New Harbor and Captain Fish out of Booth Bay. They not only narrate the trips and point out the seabirds, but they're actually, because we work with our seabird researchers, we can tell folks what's being seen, what the population is doing, what impacts are happening. So that's a really great partnership that we have with those boat companies. And then we're going to full circle all the way back to Hog Island. The founding of Project Puffin was at Hog Island, reading a book in the bookshelf. I tell the, especially the kids and the young folks that come out, that, they can also have a spark of an idea on Hog Island that may change the world. But even for our adult birders who are coming, it could be the first steps to becoming real advocates and making legislation and pressuring their lawmakers to make wise decisions. But Hog Island is a great place to come and spend a week or even a day. We have day programs and really get to learn not just about the seabird research and what we're doing, but you can learn it from the actual seabird researchers. Many of our weeks, our seabird researchers are our teachers, they're our instructors. And either, anything from taking folks out to seabirds, see the puffin colony that's been restored, or doing work on Hog Island, whether it be doing a skin lab or sketching birds or learning about how to translate that to your students if you're a teacher. All of these things have an impact on conservation. We can all be kind of a part of this story of seabird success, conservation successes that are happening. So I'm going to end there. I do want to thank Steve Kress, our founder of the Seabird Institute, and Don Lyons, who is our current Director of Conservation Science, Sue Schubel, who diligently paints all of our seabird decoys and helps organize and run our research stations in the summer. And so all the puffineers, who are all the seabird researchers over the past 50 years who have been spending their nights living in seabird colonies and pushing that seabird research. We call them puffineers, and they're part of our big family. And a lot of them leave us and go off to do amazing conservation projects all over the country and the world. So this is, dedicated to them for all their hard work. And I'll end there with some questions. And this is a puffling, if you've never seen one.
Puffling. That's cute. I like puffineers, puffling. That's so great. Awesome. So thank you so much, Eva, for that amazing presentation. I learned so much. I hope you all joining us from home also learned something, or maybe you have some questions and clarifications at any time. If you just want to unmute your microphone, and please ask away, or you could type them into the chat and I can ask Eva, and we'll do our best to answer them. Anyone out there with any questions? I have some questions of my own, but I'm holding off in case anyone else wants them. Okay, I can ask some questions. So from the point that we started research on Eastern egg rock, how has the population grown since then? And is there a strong, healthy population of puffins now on Eastern egg rock that they come back every year without, a lot of assistance of social attraction, systems? Or do we still have those in place to continue to make that island a strong hotspot for puffins?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing we've learned is that our seabird colony, at least our puffin colony on Eastern egg rock, certainly that graph I showed you earlier shows that upward trend where
Right.
up to over 188 pairs nesting on the island. But the one thing that we really know is that these seabirds have so many threats against them. We talked a little bit about forage fish and climate change and those types of things, but we also have the reality that there are more predators. If you are familiar with the conservation success story of the bald eagle, this would be a perfect example. So bald eagles in Maine 50 years ago, you were lucky to see one. If you've been to Maine in the last few years, you know that there are bald eagles everywhere. We see them every day. That success story, because of, really with DDT and Rachel Carson, which is all here in Maine, some of that, observations were happening right here in our back door. This is a species that will heavily predate seabirds. They will eat a lot of terns. When we bring our researchers off the island in August, right at the end of the breeding season, when the seabird researchers are on egg rock, it's very rare to see an eagle or a peregrine falcon, maybe occasionally. When we take our researchers off, I've taken a group of campers at Hog Island out on a boat trip the very next day, and there was 50 eagles on the island. Just the human presence does create this protective layer of predators. The other thing we really know is that gull populations, so like great blackback gulls and herring gulls, laughing gulls, all of these birds, they're very opportunistic. They will eat many, many seabirds if given the chance. And they will also take over the habitat of our nesting tern species, for instance. This is another bird that has successfully been able to rebound from the feather trade, largely in part because of humans. We give them amazing places to eat, like our garbage dumps and our fast food restaurant parking lots. We're giving them such plentiful food that their population is really booming, which is pressure. So yeah, basically we found that at least in some of these more vulnerable places, like the southernmost breeding areas of puffins, it would be hard to keep that population as stable as it is, or at least trending upwards, without our kind of somewhat human intervention, just by the mere presence of our researchers.
Gotcha. Thank you for answering that. We have a comment in the text box here from Catherine Miller. She says we should just create some human decoys to keep on the island to keep that layer of protection there. So,
well, Catherine, you and Steve Kress must have some similar ideas, because we actually tried. We created something called Robo Ranger. So it was a mannequin that was dressed in a very bright yellow rain jacket, slicker. And so the way we did it is we had our seabird researchers wear the same outfit, and they would walk around the island in that same outfit. And then the idea was that if our Robo Ranger had that outfit, it would think it's a human. And so the Robo Ranger was literally in this like little box, and it would pop up, giving the illusion of movement, and then wearing the outfit of the other seabird researchers. This is a perfect example of something that didn't work. The birds caught on that it wasn't a human, and they didn't believe it. But you know, this is, for me, I love the Robo Ranger story, because it shows you that not everything that you try is going to be successful. With science, it's really all about, you know, testing and trying again, and really thinking outside of the box. You know, literally in this case, the Robo Ranger coming out, it didn't work. Did we learn something from it? Absolutely. Could we maybe expand on that as technology changes? Perhaps. This is where I think it really is critical that we keep exploring, we keep pushing ourselves to be creative, and who knows what we'll discover in the future.
Wonderful. I also have another person, Renee, asked, you alluded to policy potential. Do you think policies are needed more at a state level or more congressional level?
Yeah, I think it's definitely depends on where you live. I mean, we're a coastal state, so obviously things happening in Maine are going to directly impact the population of our seabirds here in Maine. So I think that, you know, you definitely have to be aware of that. If you're a coastal state and you're trying to protect a coastal species. But honestly, if you go to the congressional level, you know, a congressman in a landlocked state can have just as much power, if not more, than a coastal state. So by advocating and reaching out to them and making sure that your voice is heard, it can make a huge impact, because they may be the ones signing on a bill, even though it's not directly affecting them. Because some of the legislation is more widespread, not just focused on seabirds. You know, things like the you know, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, things of that sort have even larger replications than just seabird populations. So I would say it's a bit of both, depending on where you live, who your congressmen and women are. But certainly, you know, I find that with advocacy, if you're not saying something, they're not listening, right? We have to be voices for organisms and species that can't talk, and we have this opportunity to be able to reach out and communicate to our folks directly through phone calls and emails and legislative sit-ins and all different ways that we can connect, and more so than we ever could before.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Does anyone else out there in our Zoom land have any questions for Eva before we wrap up?
I will mention that Audubon usually hosts what we call a fly-in, and we've been doing those virtually, where we do bring in folks like yourselves that are interested in conservation and advocacy. So you should look on Audubon, audubon.org. You can look up fly-ins. We usually host them kind of throughout the year, but it's a great way to learn how to advocate for conservation. And it's usually just like a Zoom training, and you come and you meet other folks and learn some tips and tricks on how to reach out to your lawmakers.
That's amazing. Wonderful.
Patrick,
Yes.
can we get the address for how we can watch those birds on Hog Island? You mentioned it, but we don't see it, so I didn't really sink too deep in my brain.
Explore.org, I think is that it? Eva?
That is correct. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. I entered in the text right now. There's a bunch of them in here. There's some for herring guts. There's also audubon.org, explore.org. Catherine Miller just put in, she apparently went directly to that link really quick, which is awesome, to look up those bird cams, and those links are now in there. So thank you for that question. I also, while the presentation was happening, was talking to my coworker about having during Puffin season, our days start out with Puffin cam meetings. So that's going to be really exciting for us, which is great. And we're just about there at our time, everyone. Before we have everyone exit, I want to thank Eva so much for your presentation, and thank everyone for coming and spending their Tuesday night with us. To let you all of some other events that are happening. If you're local, Herringut Coastal Science Center is partnering with Georges River Land Trust this coming April 9th to do an intertidal community science day at Ash Point Preserve. We're going to be getting messy in the tidal zone, looking and identifying and recording organisms to help with a management plan for that preserve, which is really exciting. You can find registration for that at herringut.org. We also have our next 3 Learn, Discover, Grow virtual events are going to be in a theme this coming transition from spring to summer. So our April, May, and June events are going to be centered around aquaculture and how Mainers have used and use ocean farming to their advantage. April's event is going to be on seaweed, which is really exciting. May's event will be on shellfish. And then June, we're doing a fun spin, and we're going to be talking with some researchers and some Native peoples about shell middens and how Native Americans in Maine have used shells and shellfish in their cultures. So that's really exciting. That's coming up. Make sure that you keep an eye on Herringut's, social media pages for all of that. In the chat, we also have a bunch of camps for Hog Island and Audubon coming up this summer, so you can visit their sites and look at all of our exciting things. We're doing really cool things. They are doing really cool things. There's a lot of really cool things happening outside in nature this summer. If you're coming to Maine, great. We'd love to see you come into any of our facilities. And again, if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, you learned something new, consider dropping a donation to us or to audubon.org or Hog Island as well. But at that, everyone, thank you so much for coming, and we can't wait to hopefully see you again on future events. Have a great night, everyone.